So, what did you check out this month?
It was October, so I watched a lot of horror movies. I rewatched the 1931 Frankenstein.
Oh, you son of a bitch! I watched that too.
Did you watch any of the other ones or just the first one?
Just the first one.
Okay, me too. This came out the same year as the Universal Dracula, and I think Frankenstein is way better. Dracula is very flat, very kind of just straightforward. They're both adapted from plays as opposed to directly from the books.
Right.
And Dracula feels just like a play, like you're watching a play with the camera pointed at the actors. But Frankenstein feels a lot more like an actual movie. I think it's interesting that there's almost no music in the movie. I think it's just over the opening titles and at the very end, because they hadn't quite figured out really how to integrate music into sound movies at the time.
I thought Colin Clive was really good as Frankenstein.
I agree. I like the trajectory of his character, the way he kind of, once everything starts happening, he's kind of like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have, been pushing things as far as I did. And then I did notice this time there were some plot holes in the movie, including when they send Waldman down to deal with the monster by himself, and he ends up getting killed. The monster disappears. Did it take his body with him? Did it hide his body? They never really ask what happened to him.
Well, later at the party, they revealed that they found his body, right?
Maybe, but it seems like you would think that Frankenstein would have kind of been a little more proactive in making sure that was being dealt with properly. But instead, he just kind of assumes everything's okay, even though he disappeared. And the monster's body is gone and everything, and he doesn't know what he did with it or anything.
Well, he told Waldman to take care of it and then left. I thought it was interesting in Frankenstein's character because in a lot of adaptations of this story, Frankenstein himself sees the monster as a tragic figure and even tries to convince others to do the same. But in this movie, he is the first one to light up his torch, screaming that they gotta go get that f***er. There's no real sorrow or remorse in his actions towards his creation. If anything, he's just mad that he failed at what he was attempting to do. Like when he goes back with Elizabeth and they're about to get married and she's worried that something is going to happen, he could not care less about everything he's done up to that point. He just throws that part of his life out the window.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting given how sort of invested he was with it earlier. But that's kind of what I find interesting. He kind of, when it actually does happen and, he is able to reanimate this corpse, basically, it kind of, it's more than he can deal with, I guess. And it feels like he's kind of, I don't know, trying to shut off part of his mind. And I wonder if that's why he didn't think really too much about what was going on when Waldman disappeared and the monster, his body was just gone.
So you think he was more willfully ignoring those things?
Yeah, that's how I took it. But, I mean, who knows? I think that's honestly thinking a little bit too much about it in this case.
I think the perspective of the monster being a tragic figure is fully the responsibility of the viewer, which does not really happen in movies nowadays. They have to lay everything out for us.
Yeah.
And there are scenes, like the skylight where the sun comes down and the flowers with the little girl that illustrate, the monster is not purely a monster. But there is still a chance that people didn't get that message. I have to imagine there were people back in 1931 who were also stupid.
Well, that's one of my problems with the movie, is taking that perspective with the monster is clearly intentional. But at the beginning, they go through the trouble of setting up the whole thing of the abnormal brain, and that being the one that goes into the monster, implying that the monster almost has no choice but to commit evil acts. And those two things don't really match up.
I like to think of it as his brain is on that razor's edge. It just takes the little tiniest thing to turn him into the crazy, angry monster because his brain is abnormal.
Okay, that would make more sense. And of course, the whole abnormal brain thing doesn't hold any weight nowadays. But that's kind of one of the theories they had at the time as to where criminal behavior came from.
I like when Frankenstein says, "Yeah, we stole the brain from your lab, Waldman." And Waldman goes, "Yeah, that was the crazy abnormal brain." And Frankenstein has this moment of silence and then goes, "That doesn't matter." And just continues on.
Yeah, I mean, he's so willfully disregarding any sense of safety or anything other than just proving that he can do what he says he can do. And I wondered what his intentions would have been after he created the monster anyway. He doesn't seem to have thought about what he was going to do because he just kind of keeps it chained up. Presumably he's going to show people eventually, but he doesn't really seem to think about it.
Yeah.
Which honestly I think is because the screenwriters didn't really think about it because it doesn't really matter. That's not what the story, that's not where the story goes. But I do feel like if you think about it, it doesn't quite make a lot of sense.
Something else that didn't make a lot of sense to me was that weird subplot of Elizabeth and Victor being romantically involved, at least at some point in the past. It was brought up in an early conversation between them, but then Victor himself was out of the rest of the movie pretty much.
Yeah, when he shows up at the beginning, it feels like he's going to be important. It's kind of when they're introducing all the characters and everything, but then, yeah, he doesn't do anything.
I think Dr. Waldman could have served his and Victor's purposes just as Dr. Waldman. They didn't even need the Victor character.
Yeah, I agree.
Speaking of characters that don't really fit, I thought Henry's father did not fit this movie at all. All of his goofy, stumbling dialogue and physical mannerisms were very off-putting, and I wonder if somebody was thinking, well, we got to put some kind of humor in this movie, but why?
Yeah, I would bet that was probably the thinking. I liked him. I thought he was funny, but I agree that he didn't fit in this movie. And he was pointless.
Completely
he didn't
pointless.
do anything. And that kind of also goes in with the way the movie ends.
I thought it would have been such a good ending if they had cut it off one scene earlier.
Yes. And I wonder if they stuck that scene on at the end, kind of after they already had everything in place, to say, you know, the audience needs more of like a happy ending or something, even though it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't say, soon we'll have a son of Frankenstein.
Yeah, it was definitely a weird ending.
Yeah, I was hoping so bad that when it did the fade on that burning windmill, that was the end. But then they did that stupid scene.
Yeah, and we've both seen Bride of Frankenstein. I think we'd both agree that it's way better than the first one.
Yeah.
I think it works a lot better thematically, and it's just a better made movie.
Not to say that this one isn't good. This one is still very good.
Right. And of course, neither of them are all that close to the book. The book is completely different, and it's basically just taking the general idea of a guy bringing a monster back to life. I thought it was interesting that they gave the name Victor to his friend, when in the book his name is Victor, and they kind of switched Henry and Victor around, which they always seem to do that kind of thing in like Frankenstein or Dracula adaptations, which I never understand.
What did you think about Karloff and his performance?
He's really good. I mean, Karloff is... There's a reason he's such an iconic horror actor, and when you see him in something like this, and then you see him playing just kind of a normal guy, or at least a character that is a normal speaking human, you really see the range that he has. And one of his kind of defining qualities is his voice, and you don't really get that in this movie, but his dedication to the role in terms of just acting like not a normal person at all, I think is something that you wouldn't really get from a lot of other actors. They would just kind of treat it as just, oh, I'm a monster or whatever.
I don't know. I mean, you saw De Niro, right?
I don't think I ever saw that one.
Oh, it's something.
Okay. I know I tried to watch it, but I never got very far.
There's been so much transformation and commercialization and parody of Karloff's take on this character, including by Karloff himself, that it's really cool to see what he originally did with it.
Yeah, and you have kind of that stereotypical image of the Frankenstein monster walking with his arms out like a zombie, and that doesn't come up until... I mean, he kind of, he's kind of stiff and everything, but he doesn't walk around like that until Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and that's because he's blind. He gets blinded at the end of the previous movie, and that's why he walks around stumbling like that.
What year was that?
43, I think.
I love how the poster for that movie completely takes that character, because it was over a decade later. It takes the idea and says, we gotta spice it up. We gotta put some more action in there. And the poster is him with his punch pulled back against the Wolfman. It just looks so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like they're in the middle of a freaking Avengers fight.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, it makes it look like some kind of superhero movie or something. Another thing that people think of when they think of the early Frankenstein movies is Igor, but he's not in this movie. He doesn't pop up until the son of Frankenstein.
Which is what, like the fourth one?
The third one. And here you do have Fritz, played by Dwight Frye, the great Dwight Frye, who was awesome. And he was in a ton of these Universal movies, usually playing a different character in every movie. He actually comes back in Bride of Frankenstein as another hunchback assistant.
Who gets killed by the monster again, right?
Yes. So that's really funny to me, that he's always playing a different character, and even in the same line of movies like that. Which, I mean, I don't know. You even have Karloff himself comes back in the House of Frankenstein, not as the Frankenstein monster, but as a human character, and a different guy is playing the Frankenstein monster. So there's a lot of actor switch-arounds as the series goes on. So
Speaking of characters getting killed, I wonder if it was a convention of the time, or they thought it would be too graphic or whatever, but we never actually see the monster killing anybody. For Fritz, it's his screaming from the other room. For Waldman, he starts to get strangled and then it dissolves away, which I actually really liked. And for the little girl, he tosses her into the river and just kind of stumbles away.
yeah, I think it is more of a time period thing. I like the way they have that intro where the actor that plays Waldman, Edward Van Sloan, is kind of warning the audience that they're going to see something potentially really disturbing.
And I think those scenes work better not being so explicit of those characters being murdered.
Yeah, that's probably true, especially for the time.
Also, freaking Elizabeth was so dumb when the freaking monster climbed through the window and grunted and everything, and she just sat there.
Yeah, I kind of wondered if that scene was kind of... Well, I think it was probably supposed to be funny in a way.
Well, I also thought it was funny when there was that huge celebration for the wedding going on throughout the entire village, so everything had to be really, really loud. But the 5 characters inside Frankenstein's house were able to hear the monster groaning from somewhere inside the house. They're like, let's look in the attic, let's look in the cellar. It's like, how loud is this thing f***ing groaning?
Yeah, that was pretty ridiculous. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
So what else did you watch this month that I also watched?
Well, I doubt you watched this one. I watched a movie from 1951 called The Steel Helmet, which was a movie about the Korean War made during the Korean War with a director who was a veteran from World War II.
So is it propaganda-y?
No, which is part of what made it so interesting. It dealt with everything in a much more realistic way and had deeper themes to everything than you would expect from a war movie of the time period. It really felt like this was somebody who was saying, I don't want to make a war movie just as a spectacle thing or as a propaganda thing, or, you know, it's not a feel-good movie in any kind of way.
So was his purpose showing, like the horrors of war?
Yeah, that was part of it. It actually dealt with a lot of stuff. I mean, racism came up. It mostly was kind of showing how being in a combat situation, especially in a place like that where you're in a completely foreign area that everything is different and you're kind of out in the jungle for a lot of it, how difficult it is for those people. And even when they kind of meet up with each other, with other people from the same side, there's a lot of arguing. People are kind of constantly on edge. It was a really good movie. I liked it a lot.
What is the significance of the title?
Basically, the main guy would have died if he wasn't wearing his steel helmet at one point.
Oh, okay.
I feel like there's probably more to it than that. I don't honestly remember. I watched this really early on in the month, but it did pop up later. They did talk about it, but I can't really remember. But the 2 things I didn't like about it were, again, it's 1951. It felt like a more serious movie than you would get from the time period for the most part, and the acting reflected that. It was much more modern and realistic for the most part, but every once in a while you would have mostly a side character that would talk in a way that didn't fit in. It felt more like just a standard movie of the time period, and it didn't fit. And the other thing I really hated about it was a very brightly shining example of that. Back when I talked about Untamed Women, and I said there was a really annoying guy in that movie that had he was always talking about being from Brooklyn or wherever the hell he was from. That same actor is in this movie playing a soldier again. And I looked up his IMDb and he played tons of soldier roles over the years. Private Dumbass and, PFC Moron.
Major Asshole.
Yeah, and he's just as annoying in this movie as he was in that one. Actually, I guess he was worse in that one because they gave him a lot more lines. And honestly, if I hadn't seen that movie first, maybe I wouldn't have hated him so much. But he was really irritating and just, I was hoping the whole time that he would die. And a lot of people do die in this movie. I don't think I've ever seen a movie from this time period, an American movie, where so many of the main characters die. But it happens a lot. And again, that was part of what made it stand out. So yeah, I would definitely, if anybody's interested in seeing war movies, and I feel like there's not as many Korean war movies also as World War II, this was really good. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. From there, I watched a movie that just came out in 2022 called Smile. This was a horror movie about kind of like a curse where people will seem to be followed around by a smiling figure that takes the form of sometimes people that they know or sometimes other people. Sometimes it pretends to be somebody and then it turns out it's actually this evil spirit or whatever, and it always ends up smiling at them.
It's giving me It Follows vibes, except for the smiling part.
Yes, it very much felt like a crappy ripoff of It Follows, with some Bird Box stuff thrown in there too.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Shameless plug for our channel. One of our shitty videos you should not watch. One of our early videos.
Yeah. And basically, you see this figure, and within 7 days or whatever, you're going to die. So you've got the ring thrown in there too, just because.
Man. Who made this movie?
I don't know, some asshole. Basically, this evil spirit makes you eventually kill yourself in front of someone else and kind of causing them as much trauma as possible. And then they start seeing this smiling figure following them around.
I'm not gonna lie, that sounds pretty stupid.
It was. I mean, the idea already, maybe if they had kind of fleshed it out a little bit, it could have potentially been interesting, like It Follows. But what made it really bad was the execution of the entire movie. I've never seen a movie with so many stupid-ass jump scares. And jump scares already are, almost by default, are cheap and lazy. A lazy way to make a movie, quote, scary. But in this movie, right from the start, before anything has even happened, if you came into this movie and you didn't know what it was, it probably would have seemed even weirder, because you'll have like a shot of a door and the music will be building up, this scary music, and getting louder and louder and louder, and something's going to happen, and then the door will open. But it's just somebody opening a door. It's not, there's nothing scary about it, but the movie treats it like a jump scare. It'll be really loud, it'll be really sudden, but it's literally just somebody opening a door and going into a room. And again, within like the first 5 minutes of the movie, you had that with, I think it was with a door, and then with a phone. And you would think with a jump scare, what they would do is the phone would suddenly ring, and that's the jump scare when everything's quiet. But they did the opposite, where the phone is ringing and ringing and ringing, and the camera keeps getting closer and closer to it and closer to it. And then somebody picks it up, and that's the jump scare. It doesn't make any sense from a kind of technical perspective. It doesn't make any sense from watching the movie, because it's somebody picking up the phone. What's scary about that? Oh, man. So the movie was boring. The main character had all this pointless backstory that I thought was going to go somewhere, and it didn't.
So how did they defeat the smile monster? Did they just frown?
Honestly, the ending, there was a point where I thought the movie was done. It was like they defeated it, everything's wrapped up, fine. And then after that, they are kind of wrapping up a dumb romantic subplot. And I was like, okay, I mean, whatever. I just want this movie to be over with at this point. But it kept going and going and going. And then it turned out the movie wasn't over. And there was another 10 or 15 minutes. It felt like they had two ideas for how to end the movie. They could have done a happy ending where the monster is defeated or whatever. And they could have done kind of a, it just gets passed on to somebody else kind of ending. And they didn't know which one to go with, so they went with both. They did one, and then the movie just kept going, and they did the other one.
Should have had a scene at the end where they're posing for a photograph, and the photographer goes, "Smile," and it goes,
That would have been way too clever for this movie. I did kind of like the creature design at the end. You had some practical effects by Amalgamated Dynamics.
That's cool.
And it was an interesting design, and I kind of liked it, but it didn't. The whole movie was just so stupid. It is not worth sitting through to get to that little part. So, yeah, I would definitely say skip this movie. It was incredibly dumb, incredibly bad. Do not watch. Go watch It Follows instead. Or even Bird Box. At least Bird Box is kind of funny sometimes because of how bad it is. This was the same kind of bad, but not amusing at all. Just irritating.
I could just see on the poster for this movie one of the critic quotes saying, "I would have rather watched Bird Box again."
It was really bad. From there, I went back to 1974 and watched The Beast Must Die, which was a movie with a really interesting setup. It reminded me a little bit of House on Haunted Hill. In House on Haunted Hill, you have Vincent Price inviting all these people over to spend the night at a haunted house, and he's paying them all however much money if they make it through the night. In this movie, you had a guy that owns a mansion on a huge estate, and he's paying all these people to come and spend a few days at the estate. And his reason for doing it is he has come to the conclusion that one of them is a werewolf, but he doesn't know which one. And he wants to hunt the werewolf and add a werewolf trophy to his collection.
That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was a good setup. And there's a part early on where you have all the characters gathered together. And by the way, one of those characters is Peter Cushing, and he's doing some kind of weird accent that I could not figure out what it was supposed to be, and it didn't really work.
You said 74?
Yeah.
So he would have been pretty old at this point.
Yeah, and he has a pretty small part. He's kind of the werewolf expert, I guess. He kind of gives explanations of things, expository dialogue and stuff.
Dr. Han Velsing.
And for some reason, it seems like they kind of treat him as one of the suspects too, which doesn't really make sense. But the main guy who has all this set up, he kind of goes around to everybody and says, here's why you're a suspect. And usually it involves them being in the vicinity of somebody who died and whose corpse turned up half eaten or whatever. So everybody, all of these characters, there's maybe like 10 of them, they've all been in situations where something like that happened. But for some reason, he thinks only one of them is a werewolf. And that's not explained. It doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of a gimmick for the movie.
Now, say it'd be a cool twist if everyone turned out to be a werewolf.
Well, it would have been more interesting than what we got. The movie ended up mostly being a bunch of boring scenes where you can't even tell what you're looking at, of people wandering around in the forest, mostly the main guy. And it's shot day for night, so for anybody who doesn't know what that means, that's shooting scenes during the day, but then later lowering the brightness and making it look like it's at night, which means things that are in shadow are really in shadow, and you can't see anything. And I read about how the people making the movie didn't take into account the fact that their main actor was black, which makes it even harder to see when he's doing stuff in the trees in the woods when they lower the brightness so much. You literally cannot tell what you're looking at. But even if you could see, it honestly would not have been interesting. So much of it was boring. And toward the end of the movie, you get something that I thought was funny. You get a werewolf break where the movie stops and they kind of say, all right, you have all the clues. Can you figure out who the werewolf is? And it kind of does like a timer.
Did freaking William Castle make this movie?
That's what it felt like. And I mean, again, I knew that was in there going in. I read about it somewhere or something. And it sounded like it was going to be a fun movie, but it ended up just being boring. And the revelation of who the werewolf is and how the ending goes was not even that much more interesting than everything else. And the werewolf itself is basically just a dog. It was disappointing. I watched a movie from 1971 called Bay of Blood, which has an alternate title, which is the coolest title to any movie I've ever heard of.
I don't know, Bay of Blood's pretty good.
Twitch of the Death Nerve.
All right.
This was a Mario Bava movie, so I was pretty interested. Mario Bava tends to do some really cool camera stuff, some cool effects, usually in camera, and good cinematography and weird ideas and stuff. But this movie was basically just for the first maybe 2/3, it was just a straightforward slasher movie. And I'm not a fan of slashers because they tend to be really boring with characters that you'd all just want them to die. And that's basically what this movie was for those first 2/3. By the time I got to the end, I was so uninvested in anything that I really wasn't paying too much attention. And once you started finding out more information about the characters and what they were all really trying to do, because it kind of turns out that there's not one person killing everybody. It turns out a lot of the characters, for their own reasons, are all killing each other. And I feel like that could have been really interesting if I had been able to keep track of who was who and what their relationships were to each other. But by that point, I had been so bored by the rest of the movie that I didn't care. And I just kind of had to go along and just watch what was happening without really understanding what was happening or why anybody was doing anything. There were some good kills. It was a creative movie on that end. And I feel like some of them were definitely ripped off for Friday the 13th movies and stuff like that. But that first 2/3, I just did not give a shit about anything that was happening. It was boring. So, and there was no cool camera stuff from Mario Bava. So it was really just disappointing all around. I think I read that he was kind of a fill-in director after they couldn't get anybody else or something like that. It seemed like it was kind of a troubled production as it went along. So honestly, I would say skip this one, unless you're a big slasher fan. I watched a movie from 1958 called The Screaming Skull.
I say that's a good title.
Yeah. This is a movie that's in the public domain, so I see clips from it pop up a lot whenever there are kind of montages of just old horror movie clips and stuff like that. Sometimes you see it in like Halloween promos and stuff like that. Basically, this movie is about a guy that brings his new wife to his estate, and his previous wife kind of drowned on the estate, and this new wife keeps encountering this skull that seems to scream. She hears a lot of screams, and they keep telling her, "Oh, it's just the peacocks that we have outside."
Like a normal size skull?
Yeah, it's just a normal skull. And the skull seems to keep kind of appearing in different rooms and kind of follow her around. Like, she keeps getting rid of it, but then it always turns up again. And it seems to kind of like jump at her sometimes. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil this one because it wasn't a good movie. It wasn't a terrible movie, but it's kind of bland. Basically, it turns out that the husband killed his old wife, and now he wants to kill this wife too because she's rich or whatever. I think that's what it was. And he keeps setting up the skull to kind of try to drive her crazy. And I think he wants to make it look like she killed herself. So constantly throughout the movie, she keeps telling people about all this weird stuff that's happening, but nobody believes her. And, you find out that the husband is behind everything. So I would not recommend it. There were some cool shots in it, mostly toward the very end. And those are typically the ones that you see in other places. Like, I know I've seen shots from this movie at the beginning of Ernest Scared Stupid, for example. So yeah, I would say skip it. I watched Of Mice and Men from 1939. Of Mice and Men was one of the few books that I read in school that I actually liked. It's one of the few books that I read for schoal that I actually read and didn't just lie and say that I read.
You loved the whole Plant That Ate Dirty Socks series, I know.
I don't even know what that is. Is
Liar.
that a real thing? That's
such a liar. You have the freaking omnibus Alex Ross illustrated collection.
Is this a real thing? Are you making this up?
No, there's a series, The Plant That Ate Dirty Socks.
Oh man, okay, I'll have to look that up because I'm intrigued. But no, I really like Of Mice and Men. It's a short book. I remember reading it in 2 days, and honestly, that just shows how much I liked it because that would not have been normal for me. This movie was a pretty faithful adaptation from what I remember. I read it once more after that, but it's been a long time since I read it. You have Burgess Meredith playing George, and you have Lon Chaney Jr. playing Lenny. And I think I read that this was Lon Chaney Jr.'s first major role, and of course it's not a horror movie. I was really surprised at how invested this movie made me in everything that was going on. It was really good. Toward the end, I think it kind of fell apart a little bit. Again, from what I remember of the book, it does follow the book, but it felt kind of like what we were saying about Frankenstein. It felt like they had to give it a happy ending. But if you've read the book, it does not have a happy ending. I mean, the whole thing of the title, Of Mice and Men, your plans are not going to go well. And that's basically what the movie is about. So you did not have a happy ending, but the music, it was mostly the music, made it feel like it was supposed to be. It made it feel like you were watching some big epic thing, but that's not what the story is. So it was weird. But the rest of it was really, really good. The characters were good. The writing was good. The actors were all good. There was one scene where the one female character kind of looks at the camera for a little while, and she's clearly not supposed to. And it seemed like she was trying not to laugh at the same time, but they just left it in the movie. So that was a little bit weird. But yeah, this movie was really, really good. And this is kind of that golden year of Hollywood that everybody talks about, where you had like The Wizard of Oz, and you had all these big movies come out that year. And this was one of the ones that was nominated for Best Picture. And I'm guessing back then that was more of a thing than it is nowadays, where you just get whatever crap is nominated for Best Picture.
Then we had the whole renaissance of Hollywood with the emergence of Spawn.
Yeah, that infamous Best Picture winner. But yeah, this movie was really good. I was legitimately surprised at how good it was. I watched season 1 of Deep Space Nine.
All right.
So those of you who have been clamoring for it, I watched it. So I tried to watch this kind of alongside the TNG episodes, because that's when they were airing. With the difficulties using Paramount Plus, that didn't quite work out. I kind of had to jump around a little bit. First of all, I liked that the main cast, the main set of characters, didn't all get along right from the start. I know that Gene Roddenberry didn't want argument among the characters. He wanted everybody to work together, and now that he's dead, the writers are kind of free to do a little bit more of whatever they want. And I thought they did a good job of having characters have interesting relationships with each other. Like you have Dax being a Trill that used to be Commander Sisko's almost like a father figure to him, but now he's a girl. And you've got Dr. Bashir is interested in her, but she's kind of always saying like, well, I'm a Trill, it's not going to work out or whatever. I like that the main guy, that Sisko has a son, and his son at first I thought was a little bit annoying. It was kind of like, oh, we're going to have a kid in the show. But I actually ended up liking Jake and the Ferengi Nog. I liked their scenes a lot more than a lot of the kind of main cast. I thought they handled it pretty well for the most part. There are still those times when it feels like you have writers that don't know how to write kids, and there's some really irritating stuff like that. But for the most part, I thought it worked, and I thought it was amusing. And I was really surprised that Quark, a Ferengi, ended up being a more interesting character, or at least a more interesting character to watch than pretty much all of the other ones.
Right.
And it helps that you've got Armin Shimmerman there. He's a really good actor, especially with the comedy stuff. You can kind of tell that the writers also felt that way, because regardless of who the episode is focusing on, it seems like Quark always gets a lot of screen time. Even if he's not the main focus of the episode, he's going to have a scene or do something.
And at the time they were promoting the show, he was the character they would have do the talk show circuit.
Interesting. I thought the actress that played Kira was not great. I definitely think it would have been cooler if Ro had been in the role like they originally wanted. But I at least thought her role in the show, I thought was interesting. I like that she's kind of always butting heads with other people and stuff like that. And I thought Odo was interesting too. I thought it was a little bit of a kind of a cheap thing when they kind of say like, oh, he doesn't know where he came from and whatever. It felt in some ways like they were trying to make him the Data of the show, where he's not human. He is, unique among all known beings, and he can do things that nobody else can do. I thought the whole thing of him having to kind of turn to liquid and sleep in a bucket or whatever, I kind of thought right from the beginning that would be something that would get in the way, where the writers would eventually just kind of forget about it and ignore it. That hasn't happened yet. It has come up a few times, and it kind of makes sense.
Well, just wait until he and Lwaxana get into their romantic relationship.
Well, they set that up a little bit, so I actually liked that episode, kind of. I liked how their relationship kind of worked out there. I thought that was interesting and unexpected. I thought the whole gimmick of the wormhole that they're kind of stationed by and kind of observing, they push it a little too much, where it seems like every other episode there's some kind of new alien coming through that nobody's ever encountered or whatever, which makes me think that on the other side of the wormhole there must just be tons of aliens flying around everywhere if they're constantly flying through this wormhole every episode. But on this side of the wormhole, nobody ever seems to go in. They kind of went in the first episode. They might have gone in one other one. I don't really remember, but it seems like they're mostly just watching it, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It feels like just kind of a very much a gimmicky plot device of just a reason to have some new alien pop through and create a new problem or whatever. And out of the whole season, there was one episode that stood out to me as being really good, which was Duet, the second to last episode.
Which one's that?
There's a Cardassian that they think is a guy that committed a lot of atrocities against the Bajorans and stuff, and they kind of imprison him, and he claims to be that person. He was played by Harris Yulin, who we saw in Buffy as one of the part of the Watchers Council, and again, he was also the judge in Ghostbusters 2. He did a really good job. I thought it was interesting that his makeup was kind of crooked. I wondered if they did that on purpose, or if they were just like, oh shit, we put it on crooked, and then they just had to go with it. But that episode was really good. It was mostly focusing on Kira and her relationship and her interaction with him. They really explored different sides of kind of a conflict like that. It was deeper than I would have expected, and there are some good twists in it, where things definitely that you think are happening are not happening. It turns out it's something different, and I liked how it ended. That whole episode had me much more engaged than any other ones in that season. Some of them were really bad, and just like TNG, and I wasn't surprised, you get a lot of really dumb fake science crap, which it just frustrates the hell out of me. I hate it so much, in case anybody hasn't figured out yet. But I would say overall, I like the actors better on TNG, but I feel like the characters maybe are more interesting on Deep Space Nine, or at least they feel like they have more potential. Because at this point in TNG, a lot of those characters they haven't really done anything with. They're just kind of there, like Riker or Troy. They're very one note.
Well, also in TNG, they're always all doing pretty much the same thing as a group, whereas in Deep Space Nine, they all have different stuff that they're doing at all times.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what makes it more interesting in that way. But I also feel like they don't do enough with that sometimes. So I don't know. I feel like mostly I'm probably looking more at the potential than what's actually there. But there was some interesting stuff. Overall, I thought it was maybe slightly more interesting than TNG is at the point that we're at in the show.
Well, in TNG's defense, Beverly has not had sex with a ghost yet.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Definitely the height of TNG was higher than this reached, but that one episode was pretty good. So there, we talked about Deep Space Nine. I'm glad it was only one season because it took a while to get through that. So now on to Voyager. I watched The Velvet Vampire from 1971.
The hell's that?
Ah, man, this was one of those horror movies you got at that time where they were kind of trying to say, hey, when people think of horror movies, they're usually thinking of old gothic stuff. We're going to set it in present day, and we're really going to make you know that it's present day. So you have a lot of really irritating actors that you just want them to die. It's such an early 70s movie in the worst ways possible. The whole movie was awful. Basically, this woman invites this couple out to her house out in the middle of the desert. And of course, it turns out she's a vampire, and she's going to kill both of them. But it takes forever to get to any of the vampire stuff. For most of the movie, they're just there kind of hanging out with her, and they keep having these weird dreams. And the husband is kind of starting to get, he's attracted to the vampire woman, so he keeps kind of like hanging out with her, and the wife is getting jealous. But then it turns out she's also attracted to the vampire woman, so I don't know. It was really dumb. I would definitely not recommend this movie. I watched The Green Slime from 1969. Have you seen this movie before?
I have not.
Okay, I had seen this movie before, and I didn't remember a whole lot of it. I'm glad I watched it again because it was pretty cool. This was a Japanese production with a Western cast, and it was kind of intended to be a sequel to a series of Italian movies. So it's kind of all over the place, but it is a standalone movie. Basically, there are these people on a space station, and they find out that there's an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth, so they travel to the asteroid to blow it up, and when they get back, it turns out they have brought along with them this green slime that feeds on electrical energy and keeps growing, and it grows into these weird monster things with tentacles and like a red eye right in the middle of their face. They reminded me a little bit of the things from the Trollenberg Terror.
Shameless plug for our channel.
And they were just as goofy, unfortunately, sometimes on the effects side. They're clearly just kind of kids in suits or short people in suits. They're kind of hobbling around and swinging these tentacles around. It looks a little bit goofy, but the movie was cool. I like that they kind of don't know how to defeat the green slime because every time they shoot it, every drop of its blood can regenerate into a new one. So they're like, just at first they're just shooting them everywhere, and there's blood all over the place. And by the time the movie's done, there's all these slime creatures all over the place. And there's kind of a subplot where the guy that's in charge of this facility right now is the ex-boyfriend of a girl that is now dating the main character who is under this other guy in rank. So they're constantly fighting with each other. And again, this was 1969. This is after things like 2001 and Planet of the Apes. And it's kind of, you're getting into the era of New Hollywood where things are more realistic and more serious. And this movie feels very much like a throwback to 50s sci-fi movies. And if you watch it as kind of a 50s sci-fi movie, it works a lot better. But given that it is from 1969, a lot of the acting feels like it doesn't really work. It just feels too old-fashioned, and the same with some of the effects. I guess this is a year after Destroy All Monsters, which had similar effects. But when you're doing it in a movie like this, I don't know, it didn't quite completely work. But there were some cool shots. And overall, it was a cool movie. It was just an enjoyable, fun, weird monster movie. So if you're into Japanese monster movies especially, I would definitely recommend this movie. And it was directed by the guy who directed Battle Royale. He did a ton of other stuff, but it's just interesting to see him doing something like this and then coming forward to Battle Royale and being just a completely different thing, a completely different style and everything. I watched The Illustrated Man from 1969. This was kind of an adaptation of the Ray Bradbury book of the same name, which I read a ways back, so I don't remember all the stories in it, but I remember being surprised that I enjoyed every single story in the book, which doesn't happen a lot with anthologies. So basically the idea is there's a guy with a bunch of tattoos all over his body, and he meets this kid. He tells the kid that each of the tattoos is a vision of the future, and basically the book is a series of short stories where each one of them is a vision of one of the tattoos that kind of come to life. In the book, the focus was the stories, and the Illustrated Man himself was just kind of a setup to kind of have everything go together. And it was really a relatively small part of the book. For the movie, they made it such a big chunk of it that they only ended up doing 3 stories out of, I think, 18 in the book. So they really gave the Illustrated Man himself a lot more character. And I did like his character. He was really creepy and weird, and he seemed like potentially very dangerous, and they change the kid to an adult that meets him. It was really weird. There was kind of like a weird sexual overtone to the whole movie that was definitely not in the book. It seemed like every story had some kind of weird sex thing thrown into it. And even the opening titles are a guy bathing outside, like naked outside in just like a, I don't know, weird marsh area. And at the end of the movie, the freaking illustrated man's walking around naked too. So I don't know. The whole movie was weird. Unfortunately, it wasn't very good. It's hard to really say why. I think there was just kind of a lack of connection to the characters. They were interesting characters from the outside, but there wasn't any real reason to care about what they're doing or why they're there, and there wasn't really any reason for them to be there in the movie. They're just kind of there. And again, the tattooed guy, he goes into his entire backstory. You get a whole origin for him and where the tattoos came from and all this stuff, which I don't think was in the book at all. And when they go into the stories, the actors that are playing the tattooed guy and the guy that meets him and the woman that gave him the tattoos in the flashbacks, they all play characters in those other stories, which was interesting because they're playing completely different characters and doing completely different acting styles and stuff. So one of the stories is about parents that are worried about their kids because their kids have this basically like a holodeck room, a VR room, where they keep recreating this African veldt where these lions are eating something, and you kind of figure out what the something is as it goes on. That's one of the most popular stories in the book. I've definitely seen that adapted in other places, but in here it didn't turn out to be very interesting. It was kind of just whatever. The second story was about people on a planet where it is raining all the time, and they're kind of trying to get to like a shelter. There's kind of like these outposts on the planet, and they're traveling from one to another, and the rain just constantly coming down is kind of slowly driving them all crazy. And I did like the set design in that section. The surface of the planet is covered in these weird like fungal growths and plants and stuff, and it looks cool. I don't think the cinematography really did it justice. I feel like a better cinematographer could have made it look a lot more interesting. But it was cool the way they portrayed it. And I don't even remember what the other segment was, which tells you that it was really interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I would almost recommend this movie because it was unique, and I did like the illustrated man as a character, but it wasn't very good by the time it was done. I was mostly pretty bored. So I don't know. The ending was interesting too because it doesn't really resolve. Basically, the guy gets a vision of the illustrated man. He sees in one of the tattoos that the illustrated man is going to kill him, and it never really resolves. So I don't know. I would hesitantly say check it out because it's weird and unique, but don't expect to really get into it that much. I watched Werewolf by Night, which was a Marvel kind of one episode thing that just came out, which is based on the comic of the same name, but not really. It doesn't really resemble the comic at all. The werewolf doesn't even come into the story until like 2/3 of the way through, and the whole thing is barely an hour long. It's done in black and white. It's supposed to kind of, well, what they want you to think is that it's emulating like a 40s werewolf movie or something, but it really felt like just a lame gimmick to try to be like, hey, look at what we're doing, this is cool and unique, but it wasn't. If you took away the black and white aspect, it would be exactly the same as all the rest of the Marvel stuff. So they could have made it a lot more interesting in that way. Basically, the story is you have a bunch of monster hunters getting together to try to determine who's going to have ownership of this magic ruby, they call it the Bloodstone, and the Bloodstone is attached to a monster that they all have to go into this big labyrinth to hunt. And there are weapons hidden around in the labyrinth that they have to go find. So at first I was like, okay, well, that's at least a cool idea, maybe. You know, it could go somewhere. But it turns out to be pretty disappointing. It's just a generic Marvel thing. I did know going in that they had some practical effects in this movie, or in this, I don't know what you'd even call it. The werewolf is practical, but it looks pretty disappointing, pretty generic. And there's still a lot of goofy either wire work or CGI to have him jumping around, and it just looks dumb. And the other big practical thing was the Man-Thing shows up, and they built a Man-Thing. They built like this practical animatronic thing, and I've seen some behind-the-scenes footage of it, and I said, okay, that's cool. But in the movie, it doesn't look good because of the way they have it act, I guess. The way it's puppeteered. It's very over-the-top, cartoony. It's entirely played for comic relief. And it turns out that's the monster they're hunting. Spoiler, is the Man-Thing. And they just call it Ted, which again is supposed to be funny that they, you know, his name is Ted. If you call it Ted and try to be friends with it, it won't attack you and whatever.
That sounds really stupid.
Yeah, it was very much the modern style of Marvel humor, where it's like, oh look, it's so funny and whatever, and it's almost like it almost feels like they kind of are making fun of the source material by saying, look at how dumb this is, and like, isn't it funny? And I hate it when they do that.
Because the one thing Man-Thing is known for is its humor.
So there was no explanation to the character of the Man-Thing or anything. He's just a monster. And there really wasn't any explanation to anything. I mean, none of it really mattered. All the other characters are there just to kind of be in the way and to all get killed, basically. The action was really bad, as you would expect from a Marvel thing. Lots of dumb flips and things that don't make sense and just very unrealistic stuff. Yeah, it just was not interesting. I was really bored by the time it was done. So I would say skip it. I watched The Masque of the Red Death from 1964. This was one of the several collaborations between Roger Corman and Vincent Price based on an Edgar Allan Poe story. And I read that this was one of Roger Corman's favorite movies that he did, and I could definitely see it. This movie was really cool. It actually adapts The Masque of the Red Death and another Poe story called Hop Frog, and kind of combines them together because they both involve a masquerade party. I was a little bit disappointed that the Hop Frog subplot really was kind of just a standalone subplot and doesn't really tie into the main story. I was kind of hoping it would all come together at the end, but it doesn't. But the movie was cool. Basically, Vincent Price is this sadistic prince that lives in a castle, and there's a plague going around, and he kind of invites all these people into the castle to all kind of like the nobility or whatever to have a big party, but he very casually will kill people if they don't do what he wants, and he kidnaps this kind of a peasant girl at the beginning to kind of be his plaything at the castle, and he also kidnaps her boyfriend and her father, and she ends up trying to free them, and there are some good sequences in this movie. There's a scene where the boyfriend and the father, where Vincent Price has a bunch of daggers, and he says one of them has poison on it. He first he tells the boyfriend and the father to fight each other to the death, and they refuse. So he says, all right, I have all these daggers, one of them has poison on it. You're going to kind of do a Russian roulette and each, cut yourself and see if it kills you, and then go to the next person and get the next blade and cut yourself. It was a good sequence. And the whole movie was good. The cinematography was great. The acting was great. Vincent Price was really good in this movie, especially. Toward the end, it definitely gets a little more abstract and kind of more like the story. It was cool, but it didn't really fit the movie as well as it could have, I think. It was a little too much of a kind of shift away from what the movie had been, especially since the main character really is that peasant girl who's not in the story. And she's not really there for the ending of the movie, so it kind of lost a little bit toward the end, I think. But I would definitely recommend this movie if you're a horror fan, if you're a Vincent Price fan, if you're a Roger Corman fan, if you're an Edgar Allan Poe fan. This movie was really cool. I watched The Sandman on Netflix, which as of right now is one season, and kind of like a bonus episode.
Yeah, I talked about that.
Yeah, I didn't go back to listen to what you said like I said I was going to, because I forgot. And I reread the issues that were adapted into these episodes. I don't remember what you said about it, so I can only say what I thought. From that first episode, I was definitely intrigued. I was really glad that it didn't suck like I thought it was going to. I thought they had a really good actor for Dream. I liked the presentation of everything. But as the show went on, I definitely lost a lot of interest. I felt like they took a really unique comic that has a lot of visual stylization to everything and a lot of shifts in storytelling and presentation, and it's always doing something interesting and unique, and they turned it into kind of a generic fantasy TV show. I thought especially on the visual side, it just looks like any generic TV show. You have scenes that are in the dream realm, and you have scenes that are in the normal realm, and they look exactly the same. You have scenes in hell, it looks exactly the same as everything else. There was a lot of opportunity for them to do really interesting stuff. What I always imagined, if I could have done an adaptation myself, I would have wanted different styles for every person's dreams, or every dream, scenario. Some cool animation stuff. You could do stop motion stuff. You could do like hand-drawn animation. You could do cool CGI stuff, which I don't usually like CGI, but I feel like for something like this, they could have done something really cool. But it's all just pretty straightforward. It all just looks the same as everything else. So that was really disappointing. I thought one thing that really didn't work for the show was the way they handled the storytelling. In the comic, Neil Gaiman has to be really careful about every line of dialogue because he has to get so much story content into a limited number of pages. And I read a thing with him where he talked about how he would write out his dialogue, and then he would have to go and cut a lot of stuff out and change things around to really make it all fit and get everything in there that he needed to get in there. And it really paid off because it really works in the comic like that. But for the TV show, it felt like they said, well, we have to stretch out this story to a full episode length, some arbitrary length of just what people think of as being an episode. And they would take, a scene that should have gone by in, a minute, and they'd stretch it out to like 10 minutes. And it really did not work for me. There were so many scenes that I thought could have been cut out entirely, definitely condensed a lot. They really needed to work on that a lot. It made me lose interest. And another thing was I felt like there was a lack of character connection in the show. The comic really gets you in there, gets things moving, and the show kind of, given that it's so slow, but the characters often don't know what's going on, or you don't know enough about the characters yet, it kind of feels like you're watching things for no reason, and you're just kind of watching characters go through their scenes. So, yeah, I ended up being pretty disappointed with the show. I agree with you. I remember you saying that Patton Oswalt was a bad choice for Matthew. I completely agree. It definitely felt like they intended him to be the comic relief and kind of add some levity to all the darkness that's in there, but it was too different. It was too much of a mismatch there. I thought it was smart to have him come in earlier in the story so that he's almost like the audience character where he doesn't really know what's going on, so he's asking questions, and he's somebody there for other characters to talk to when they're by themselves. I thought that was a smart decision, but his performance, his humor didn't fit, but then also the way his lines were recorded. It just felt like somebody sitting there recording lines. From an audio perspective, it didn't fit in with the sound of everything else. The portrayal of hell was something that I was especially disappointed with. I was really looking forward to that. But even all the demons are basically they look like Buffy demons. They're just people in generic, almost like Star Trek makeup, where everybody just has a different forehead.
Not everything is going to be Spawn. You just have to accept that.
Honestly, Spawn was more creative than this show was in its portrayal of hell.
Oh, man. Really?
Yeah. Not more successful maybe, but more creative. Yeah, I was pretty much disappointed the whole way through. I actually have not finished the last episode. I did think it was cool that they did the cat episode animated, and that's exactly what I mean by they should have done a different style for so many different things. And I always imagined Dream himself being played by a different actor from every person's perspective, but I realized that would be really difficult to actually do in real life. But ideally, I feel like for me, that's what they would have done.
Yeah, get De Niro in there. Martin Sheen.
No, he would have played one of the Lords of Hell or whatever. Yeah, I have not finished the Calliope section. I thought it was just too uninteresting. When it started, I felt like this was the kind of show where I had to sit down and watch, but by the time I got halfway through, it ended up being something I kind of left on in the background, which is very disappointing. I'm still glad that it's not terrible, and I'm honestly surprised that it's not terrible, but I'm not going to go out of my way for season 2. We'll see what happens. I'll probably watch it eventually if it comes out. The comics are much, much better. They're much better written. They're much better in terms of presentation. They're much more interesting overall. And reading them this was the first time I had read them in a long time. They may have been, back when I first read them, they may have been the first DC comics that I had read. So a lot of the references to other DC stuff completely went by me without me even knowing it was something. I just assumed that, Cain and Abel and all these other characters, I assumed that they were all created for this comic. But going back and reading it now, when I have read a lot of DC stuff, it's really cool to see all the different stuff that Neil Gaiman is playing with and, giving kind of new angles on all these previous creations. That was definitely something that I enjoyed a lot, and it just adds depth to the whole thing. So yeah, I would highly, highly, highly recommend the comics. The TV show, I would say, honestly, I don't know. It's not bad, but it's not great. I would probably say, I don't know. If you want to check it out, then you've probably already checked it out. But I was not that invested. So that's everything I did this month. So what did you check out?
Well, we already talked about Frankenstein, so I'm not going to talk about that. I watched a movie from 1995 called Mechanical Violator Hakaider.
Okay, I'm going to assume this is Japanese.
Yes, it is based on a manga from the 70s, which was turned into a popular anime as well. And I'm pretty sure it was made by the same guy who created Kamen Rider. This movie was a really interesting blend of special effects. There was stop motion, there was miniatures, there was mid-90s CGI, not too much, and a lot of practical stuff. And it was cool. Hakaider was actually a villain in the original material, but this time they made him an anti-hero. And the usual hero is the villain in this movie. So there's this dude and he runs Jesus Town. which is the only non-shithole in the whole world after apocalyptic whatnot, and he's got this robot enforcer. And Hakaider is dug up by accident somewhere else, and eventually makes his way to Jesus Town and teams up with these rebels who want to fight the dude in charge, because in order to spread peace, he's just lobotomizing everyone who can't play by his rules. But of course saying that it's the right thing to do. So Hakaider doesn't like that, and his standpoint is if you don't have free will, you might as well be dead. And it is pretty damn violent. And again, with all the practical effects, some of it was really cool / unintentionally funny. And the really interesting thing to me was it was completely set up like an anime. The production design, the costumes, the cinematography, the dialogue, the characters, it was like they were rotoscoping it for an animated movie, but just left it. It was very interesting. I watched Dracula Untold from 2014.
Oh man, of course you did.
Hey, I had to complete my viewing of the Dark Universe Pantheon. And I expected this movie to be a train wreck from start to finish. This was the first movie where Universal said this is going to kick off our Dark Universe. But I will say, it has the bones of a halfway decent movie, unlike The Mummy, which was just a train wreck from start to finish. There's the expected CGI shenanigans, and the last 20 minutes throw everything out and turn into a giant vampire action fest for no real reason. The main character is played by Luke Evans, I think, and he's Vlad the Impaler, but he decides he's done killing people because he was only doing it under the orders of someone else, and now he has his own land and territory, but the person he was killing for demands 1,000 boys for his army from Vlad's area. And Vlad decides to venture up to a demon cave where Charles Dance is a vampire who cannot leave the cave.
Why?
That's part of the curse of being in the Dark Universe.
Okay.
I think he says it was part of the deal for the vampire that made him a vampire. And it's kind of the same thing because he tells Dracula he'll give him part of his power to help him overthrow the Sultan dude. And if he can resist drinking blood for 3 days, then he'll just revert back. So I think there was some kind of deal that went out with him, which is why he's trapped in the cave. And Dracula says, great, I can take out the Sultan's army and protect my son, who's going to be one of the 1,000 boys taken away. And the acting by the three main characters, Dracula, his wife, and his son, was very passable. I was surprised. And there were plot holes and some ridiculous things that were meant to be serious. Like at one point, everyone in Dracula's troupe finds out he's a vampire. And they try and burn down his hut and murder him or whatever because, he's a vampire. But they fail, and he pops out all burnt up and basically yells at them for being dumb. He's like, I'm doing this for you guys, come on. And they just kind of accept it and go, okay. And there's one point where the Sultan says, well, my whole army is terrified of this legend of Dracula and how strong he is, but they can't be scared of what they can't see. And then he blindfolds 100,000 dudes while they are marching. Which naturally doesn't help at all anyway. And Dracula summons up his army of 1 billion bats, and he pulls a Brendan Fraser mummy thing where the bats turn into the shape of his arm and his fist, and he starts punching through the army.
Oh, man.
There were really dumb things, but if they hadn't done all that crap, I could have seen this movie being enjoyable for different reasons. Charles Dance being the master vampire who escapes at the end because obviously Dracula can't resist drinking blood, there's a whole thing. His character was going to be used in this Dark Universe as the Nick Fury character.
Interesting.
Well, I would use the term dumb, the way it played out. And this legit could have been a passable, decent movie if not for all the choices Universal made to try and mimic Marvel. There were the bones of a good movie in there.
That is the most surprising thing I think I've ever heard.
I watched The Descent from 2005. Have you seen this?
Yeah, but it's been a long time. I remember being pretty disappointed with it, given that it has such a high reputation.
Yeah, part of the reason I decided to watch it was the high reputation. So there's this group of climbers, daredevil people, who go into a cave, but it turns out that they've been misled into an unmarked cave for the excitement, and since it hasn't been vetted, it's not entirely safe, and there are natural things that happen, like cave-ins and stuff. But then it turns out that there's something else down there with them, which proceeds to make it even more unsafe. I mean, just being trapped in a freaking cave would be scary enough, so no thank you. I didn't even need the horror aspect of something else being down there. The characters all had established personalities, which I liked because there were a lot of them, and you want to avoid that thing of we have a bunch of people, but we're only really paying attention to one or two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they did a sequel, and the special effects guy or the editor or something of this one made that one. And I think I might pick up right at the end of this one, I'm not sure, where one of the characters for some reason goes back to the cave.
Well, didn't somebody get left behind at the end of that one?
Yes, but it was implied that they didn't make it. I thought this movie did not stand up to its reputation.
From what I remember, once the creatures show up, it kind of, it feels like they don't really know how to handle it, and it just kind of becomes generic creature stuff.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And it's kind of disappointing because some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, they did a lot of work with the actors who were playing these monsters, but the way it was actually shot, most of that did not translate to the final product. I watched Resident Evil, the final chapter from 2016, and it's hard to know which ones I've actually seen because they all have dumb titles and they all look the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, what number is this in the series?
The last one.
Okay, so number 12.
This one probably has the best Resident Evil movie villain just because he's actually a good actor. It's the dude that plays Jorah from Game of Thrones.
Okay.
And he's probably in some of the other ones too. And I wonder sometimes what these people who are good actors and have been in good stuff think about being in such a stupid movie like this.
Actually, looking him up, it looks like he was in the second one and the third one, and whatever number that one is.
So for those of you who don't know, the Resident Evil movies have Mila Jovovich as a super-powered person running around trying to take down Umbrella and fight zombies and stuff. And her name is Alice. I'm going to ruin the plot of this movie for you. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Super twist. Alice is actually a clone of the T-Virus creator's daughter. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. And super duper twist, the old original Alice is actually still alive and is also played by Mila Jovovich with pretty crappy makeup and a wheelchair. And Wesker's in this one again. And at the end, they pull a RoboCop where old Alice looks at Wesker and goes, "You're fired," which then allows the Red Queen computer program to drop a door on his head, which is pretty good.
Oh, man.
Oh, and the Red Queen is also a digital version of Alice. But I think they revealed that in one of the earlier movies.
Yeah, I think so.
They all blend together.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, there is a bigger focus on story in this movie than the other movies. The other ones are so stupid and generic and just actiony. I think of jumping down that huge 10,000 meter shaft with the guns. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And for being the last movie in a string of 57 movies, you'd think they'd make this one the most CGI-laden, action-packed piece of shit. But admittedly, it'd be hard to top that one scene where they're falling down that 10,000-foot hole at the speed of sound while shooting bullets even faster ahead of them. And for some reason, Isaacs, who is the Jorah character, has allowed old Alice to live, even though there's no reason for that. And he's mad because she owns 50% of Umbrella. And once she dies, he can take control of Umbrella. Which is so dumb.
Hasn't the entire world been taken over by zombies at this point?
We'll get there. So she's been around doing nothing this whole time. And he's just waiting for her to die so he can take full control. And it's never explained why he doesn't just kill her himself. Oh, and the real Isaacs, because there's clone Isaacs walking around, that's how they explained him being killed in prior movies.
Of course.
And the real one has some kind of cyber implants that let him anticipate things. I think that's the best way I can describe it. Almost like precognition, but with technology. So at one point, Alice is walking towards him, and there's this huge Sherlock Holmes thing from those movies where he anticipates her killing him with a bunch of objects, and we see it, and it looks really dumb. And he says, "You'll never make it to the ice pick, fountain pen, or whiskey glass in time, Alice." Because in his precognition technology viewing, it always ends with him killing her, and it's like probability 100%. And, of course, there's a bunch of computer sounds and overlays while that's happening, which is really funny. What was the question that you asked?
Why can't he leave the cave?
Whatever.
Oh no, about the zombie apocalypse.
Isaac's goal was to release the virus on purpose way back in the first movie because the world was going to hell in a handbasket with overpopulation and agricultural plagues and whatever. And he said, we need to basically reboot the Earth. So we're going to release this thing, kill off pretty much everybody. The world's still going to end the way it would now, but we're going to be in charge of how it's rebuilt. The whole world was supposed to have ended and the zombies would be gone and everything. That was already supposed to happen. There is some stuff, I don't know if nostalgic is the right word, because you have to feel nostalgic about the old ones. At one point, they end up back in the same laser hallway from the first movie.
Oh, man.
And Alice's goal is to get the antivirus that counteracts the T-virus, and it's airborne, so all she's got to do is break the container. But she has to do it up on the surface, because they're down below the Earth in the hive, or whatever the hell they call it. So she eventually gets up there, and shatters the container, and within 5 seconds, the entire city worth of zombies falls over. But in the epilogue, she says it could take years for the antivirus to ride the winds around the Earth, so I'll just keep on killing until it does. But I will say, this actually sounded like a real ending to those movies. It didn't seem like they were going to continue with more.
Was it the last one?
I think so. I don't think they've made one in this series of these movies after this one.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
But still dumb. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this was like, oh, you gotta watch this movie. It's dumb. Speaking of dumb movies, for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, I watched Mr. and Mrs. Smith from 2005.
Oh, man.
What a dumb movie. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie play two super spies / assassins who don't know that about each other, but they're married, and eventually they find that out, and they're put on each other's hit list, and there's a bunch of stupid jokes and lots of guns, and it was really, really stupid. So if you want to watch a stupid movie, this is it. That's all I have to say about that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one. I watched Land of the Lost from 2009.
Oh.
I don't fully understand why they decided to make this into a comedic parody of the show. I actually had to check to make sure that the original show wasn't a comedy.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. I'm a big fan of the original show. The guy that was kind of the showrunner was trying to make it a serious survival show with all these sci-fi elements, but the producers kept trying to dumb it down and make it more for kids. So it's kind of a mixed bag. You can see the cool ideas there, but the execution isn't quite there. But it's still just a straightforward sci-fi, show with dinosaurs and time travel and other dimensions and stuff.
I could see little winks and nods to the show if they decided to do the movie that way, but the whole movie is one big in-your-face joke. It's an insult, almost like spitting in the face of the people who would go to this movie having enjoyed the show.
I agree 100%.
The effects are stupid. The story, and that's in quotes, just kind of plods along without any sense of pacing. It's like a room full of writers, that's also in quotes, sat there coming up with jokes and just copy-pasted that into a Word document and called it script.doc. The whole movie was so pointless. So in the show, a scientist and some kids go through a time portal?
It's just a guy and his kids on a camping trip, basically.
And it's a time portal.
Yeah, to like a pocket universe, kind of. You kind of find out more about the land as the show goes on. The first season actually kind of wraps things up at the end, and after that, they go to different showrunners that say, you know what, let's just throw in whatever random fantasy stuff we can. So it kind of turns into a different show, but it's basically them trying to find a way out the whole time.
So I had to watch something good.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, see, I'm not being sarcastic here. I watched The Power of the Dog from 2021, which is based on a 1967 novel by Thomas Savage, and it's set in 1920s Montana. And there's a widow, played by Kirsten Dunst, and her son, and they run an inn, and two wealthy brothers of a cattle ranch come through town on a cattle drive, and they stay there. And the one brother ends up falling for Dunst, but the other one, who's kind of a dick, and he's played by Benedict Cumberbatch, doesn't like her son, and thinks that she's just in it for the money. And she is very introverted and insecure, so there's a lot of forced humiliation, because he's really good at making her feel like shit. and her son goes away to school, so he's not there to kind of be her backup, and she ends up turning to alcohol, which makes things worse. And when the son does come back on a school break, he's not happy with the way she's being treated. He's not happy with the way he's being treated. Cumberbatch is kind of the leader of all of the ranch hands, and they all just make fun of him. But there's something that happens, I don't want to give too much away, where the son and Cumberbatch actually start to build a relationship. The whole movie is a very character-driven thing, and it was good. And it was a master of the awkward silence. There were probably 25,000 of them, and with each one, you could have cut through the tension with a knife. But it was done in a really good way. Like, I felt uncomfortable multiple times.
I've never heard of this movie. You're making it sound interesting.
I finished The Rings of Power, Season 1 from this year, 2022. And it really threw in a lot at the end. And not just reveals, but like the writer said, oh shit, we only have one more episode? I thought we had like 5. The production design for the show is cool, and even though there's a lot of characters, most of them are defined well enough that they don't feel like carbon copies of each other. Like The Hobbit, where you had 16 dwarfs who all looked the same, did the same things, and whose names were just anagrams of each other. With all of these wrap-ups, they're going to have to come up with a bunch of new plot threads. It was disappointing that the season finale wrapped up so much so quickly. There were entire episodes that didn't address what certain characters were doing in other parts of the world. So the fact that the whole thing had a slower burn type feel, but right at the end it was quick, cut to wrap everything up, that was kind of dumb. I watched Black Death from 2010. Have you seen this movie?
No.
Have you heard of this movie?
No.
You should check out this movie.
No. Maybe. Go ahead and talk about it.
It's set in the Middle Ages, and there's this group of knights, well, not really knights, they're more mercenaries, led by Sean Bean, and they're going out to a village that has purportedly not been affected by the plague, which is wiping out pretty much everything else. And there's been reports that the reason this village has been spared is because they've renounced God and are led by a necromancer. And this group has stopped at a monastery to pick up a monk, since the group is acting on behalf of a bishop. They take a young monk, played by Eddie Redmayne, since he has recently fallen for a girl, and he's looking for signs from God on what direction he should take. And he says, well, these guys came in, they're looking for someone, I'm going to go with them. So they head out to this village, which is a long trek. And this was made in 2010, so I imagined it would take the dumb joke, stupid characters, fake-looking action route. And the fact that it was talking about supernatural stuff, I said, God, this is going to be really stupid. But I was very pleasantly surprised. The story and the writing are solid, and the movie lets that speak for itself. Honestly, was kind of a gem in the middle of 2010 mediocrity. The effects were good, not in-your-face CGI. I would say a good chunk of them were practical, and pretty brutal, pretty gross. The acting was good, and I don't want to give everything away, but originally there was an entirely different ending that would have completely altered absolutely everything. And I'm glad they chose to go the way they did. It gave the movie a lot more integrity. So you should check it out. I think you would like it.
All right, you got me intrigued.
I watched Source Code from 2011. I remember when this was announced, and the big push was it was by the same guy who did Moon, which I really liked. I was excited. I said, I'm going to check out that movie, but then I just never did until now, in 2022. Jake Gyllenhaal plays an Air Force pilot who finds himself reliving the same chunk of time on a train where a bomb is detonated. And it turns out that he's part of a military operation utilizing this new technology to relive events and figure things out to prevent another future bombing. So he has to figure out who the bomber is and details about the bomb, all that stuff. And it's not just watching what happens, he's actually present in this reality as another person, but everyone sees him as that person. So whatever he does in this reality, the things that react to his actions are the way that things would actually play out. So sometimes he goes through and things go very badly for him, and other times people treat him like he's crazy. It was a very interesting concept, and similar to Moon, there's a whole other level of puzzles and deception going on that's slowly revealed over time. And the ending was also very much like Moon in the way it played out and what happens to the characters. But I don't want to say more because that would give too much away. But it was a cool movie. I liked it. What did you think?
I remember thinking that it was all going to hinge on whether it all ended up making sense in the end, and I don't remember why, but I remember that something about it didn't make sense. So I don't know. It is something that I've been meaning to watch again to see if maybe I would look at it differently now. But at the time, I remember being disappointed.
I watched Firestarter, but the 2022 version,
Oh, jeez.
yeah, that pretty much describes it. It was very by the book. The story is two people submitting themselves to some experiments in college, which ended up giving them psychic powers, and they had a daughter who also has psychic abilities, and she can start fires. But the institution responsible for the experiments is hell-bent on getting this daughter for their institution, so the whole family's on the run, while she's struggling to figure out how to use these powers since her parents always told her not to use them. It's very much an early Stephen King story. It feels like an early Stephen King story, and even though this version was in 2022, with all the modern effects and techniques and whatever, it can't escape feeling like an early Stephen King story. It didn't really add anything new that the old one had already done, which was what, 1984?
Yeah, something like that.
So this was very forgettable. It's like a Saturday morning movie. If you really want to watch it, go watch the old one. If you want the best version of it, go read the book. I read Virtual Boy Works, which came out in 2022, which is a full exploration of the Nintendo Virtual Boy, which is a very much failed Nintendo console that came out back in the 90s. It was a very good book. It was by Jeremy Parish, who has been writing about game stuff for a long time, and he knows his stuff, and he writes in a coherent way, which is very refreshing. I remember when books about video games were such a rare thing, so it's nice to find good stuff. Just annoying to have to sift through all the crap. The Virtual Boy only had a 22-game library. They pretty much shut it down as soon as it came out, which is insane, considering it's an actual Nintendo console. And this book goes through each of the games and has pictures from a private collector and hits on the history, the inner workings of the console, fan community efforts after it died. It was definitely a good read if you're interested in stuff like this. I don't have a Virtual Boy myself. It's been on my get someday wish list forever, but I'm not a millionaire. And with this stupid era we're currently living in, where anything remotely retro gaming is abhorrently expensive, it's not happening anytime soon. I read Shareware Heroes, The Renegades Who Redefined Gaming at the Dawn of the Internet, which also came out this year, 2022. And the book covers exactly what the title says. I am not a PC gamer. I've never been a PC gamer, so looking through these types of resources is very interesting because I'm coming in from the outside, even though this stuff happened decades ago. And this is by Richard Moss, who is another author who knows his stuff. And I have another book by him. It's The Secret History of Mac Gaming, and I'm going to check that out too. It's very interesting. The biggest focus... Are you familiar with what shareware is?
No, I don't even know what that means. Is that like open source kind of stuff?
No. The original model was I make a game and I give it away for free. And if you like the game and you want to, you can send me some money at this address.
Okay.
It was very much a community-driven effort. And as you might guess, most people didn't make any money. But that wasn't their focus. The biggest focus company-wise in this book is Apogee and id and Epic and a little bit of Ambrosia, who all started as like shareware companies. Like, I don't know if you know about Doom.
I know of it. I remember hearing on the news when they accidentally opened that portal on the moon of Mars or whatever. I remember The Rock doing an interview about it, about his part in it.
Doom was separated into episodes, and the first episode was given away for free. And the coolest part of what id did is they knew it was going to be so good. They knew it was going to just sell like crazy, that they told stores and publishers and retailers, hey, we're giving you this game. You can sell this game and take all of the profits because we know people are going to pay us for the later episodes.
Okay.
So you could walk into a retailer and see 10 copies of Doom from 10 different companies, all with different box art, all with whatever, all for the same price. And id was just sitting there raking in, man, I think it was something ridiculous, even from the beginning. It was like $100,000 a day or something. The book also covers a lot of individuals, since that's what a lot of shareware was, just individual people making games. And the whole shareware thing was an interesting business model. There are plenty of people who didn't see anything, even for games that spread like wildfire, they didn't make any money. But it's very clear how that morphed into the billion-dollar industry that games are today. I mean, think about how many free-to-play shit there is that still makes tons of money.
Yeah.
There were two things in the book that kind of threw me off. First, it was a little hard to keep up when the author kept oscillating with shareware was dead, no one was making any money. And then they would talk about some guy who ended up being able to quit his job because he was making so much money. But then it would revert back to shareware was dead, no one was making any money. And the other thing I wish there was more of was knowing what commercial software was coming out during the years he was discussing certain shareware games. I'm coming in as an outsider. I don't know what commercial software came out in certain years, and the author would talk about how such and such shareware was winning awards and rivaled most commercial software, but I wanted to know what he was comparing it to. There was a little bit of a barrier that if you knew more history of PC gaming, it would be easier to relate to this book. But overall, it was fascinating. I'm glad I read it. And I watched Doom, the first movie from 2005. Earlier this year, I watched the most recent Doom movie, Doom Annihilation, which was just awful. And I had not seen the 2005 one before. Have you seen it?
I saw most of it back in the day, but I don't think I sat through the whole thing.
Over time, it has this reputation of just being just this terrible movie. So I expected it to just be the worst thing ever. But I will say, compared to the 2019 one, it is a masterpiece. One, it's got some actors who actually know how to act. Freaking Rosamund Pike. Who would think that Rosamund Pike would say, yes, I'll be in the movie called Doom about Doom?
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't as big back then as she is now.
You got Carl Urban is the main guy who can act in some stuff, and other stuff I'm not sure what he's doing. Like Dredd, I thought was surprisingly really good.
Yeah.
And he's in Lord of the Rings and stuff, but then he's in other stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? So you got the two of them, and when they first encounter each other in the movie, it's revealed that they know each other, and they avoid the cliche thing of him saying, yeah, we used to be together, by just making them siblings instead, which I thought worked way better, and it totally altered the way you perceived their interactions and conversations.
You corn-fed fool.
Oh,
that's what he
yes,
says in Star Trek. I think of it, yeah.
Yes, I forgot. That's what I was thinking of. Was like, what the hell are you doing? And it's almost like when they were making the movie, they were trying to make a standalone movie, and someone said, no, this has to be Doom. They never explicitly say anything about hell. They're just on Mars, and they're doing genetic experiments based on some ruins that they found, where civilization had done genetic experiments. They don't actually say things came through from hell. We're dealing with demons and stuff. There's none of that. The only time any reference is made is near the end. Carl Urban says, ugh, this place is hell. It always has been. So it doesn't actually have anything to do with hell. He's with a group of space marines, and they're going up there to check out some distress call. So they get up there, and this is before The Rock was the omnipresent Hollywood thing he is now.
Yeah, but I do remember that it was still surprising that he turns out to be the bad guy.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's interesting because he's with this group of people, and now, if he's with a group of people in a movie, it's just these people that you know nothing about, can't remember anything about, they're all super generic, and there's just a rock.
Yeah.
But because he wasn't as big of a name back then, he truly feels just like another member of this group. He happens to be in charge of them, but the rest of them are actual characters, which was very refreshing. And like you said, he does turn out to be the bad guy, but not because he's been secretly working to overthrow whatever. It's just because he's saying, these are my orders. And that causes him to go down this path of, well, I'm going to eventually turn out to be the bad guy because I can't get away from my orders, and you have to follow orders too. I felt like if it wasn't Doom, this could have been a cool movie if they didn't feel like they had to stick in Doom stuff. There's that one thing near the end where it's this big extended sequence of first person, and it's completely out of place. It doesn't fit anything else in the movie. It comes out of nowhere, and then it's just over. And it's shot really stupidly, too. It's like somebody turned their freaking joystick sensitivity to 0.6.
I remember back when the movie was when they were doing all the publicity stuff for the movie, and they were like, "You've never seen a more accurate video game adaptation. We even have parts of the movie in first person. You're going to feel like you're playing the video game while you're watching the movie." And at the time I was like, that's not why I go to see a movie. That sounds weird. And it was.
Yeah. Again, if they hadn't made it a Doom movie, it could have been a cool sci-fi movie.
So you're saying I should watch it?
I'm recommending it over the newer one for sure that was made over 10 years later. Not good, but not a complete train wreck. I've still been playing a lot of Splatoon 3, doing a lot of Salmon Run. So Salmon Run, because I know you don't play this game,
Correct.
is a team of 4 and you're all working together against a ton of computer dudes kind of swarming the stage, and your goal is to get your quota of golden eggs in a basket without dying. The weapons are picked at random for each wave, and there's 3 waves you got to complete. And the only way to get golden eggs is to kill big boss guys among all these dudes swarming the whole stage. So it's very much a team effort. I like it a lot. And depending on what weapon you end up with for each wave kind of determines what your role is going to be for that wave, because some are very strong but have a slow firing rate. Some of them just suck overall. And you really have to know your role on the team. And it's frustrating when you're playing with people who don't really know what they're doing, because there's only 4 of you. And if one person's not pulling their weight, you pretty much can't win. But I'm really enjoying it. I know you're probably going to want to talk about this one. You've been talking up No Man's Sky forever. So I started playing it too. And this game originally came out in 2016, and they've released all these updates over time. So now it is actually the game they were saying it was back in 2016.
Almost.
I was completely overwhelmed by the openness of everything. I was expecting a more linear path of do this, then do this, and then you can kind of mess around here. But I was really surprised when it was like, go do literally whatever you want.
Yeah, it's really bad when it comes to kind of introducing elements or letting you even figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, there was such a steep learning curve. It took a good chunk of time before I even felt comfortable in taking any sort of action. But I'm really enjoying it. I can see my time being sucked away. So I've been building up my inventory slots because there's just too much stuff.
Yeah, well, they've changed it a lot. It used to be a lot harder to increase your inventory slots, which I preferred. It used to be more challenging. They've made it a lot easier. Nowadays, you can just go to a space station, but you don't have to actually work at it, which makes it way too easy, in my opinion. Are you playing on survival mode or the regular mode or whatever?
Well, that's something I wanted to talk about. So there's the normal mode. There's also I think it's called exploration mode or creative mode or something, where there's no chance of you dying.
Yeah.
And then there's survival mode, which is if you die, is that permanent death?
No, there's another mode that's permadeath mode.
Yeah, it's permadeath that actually erases your save file if you die, which I was not going to do that one. I'm just doing normal.
Yeah, survival, it's just a lot more dangerous, a lot easier to get hurt and stuff like that. And when you die, you lose everything in your inventory. You can go back to where you died and pick it back up, but you have to go do that yourself and everything. And same if your ship gets shot down, you lose everything that was in your ship. And I don't know how different it is now from the normal mode, but they recently did an update where if you're in combat in your ship or you just get hurt on the ground, your technology can be damaged to where you have to repair it. And when that happens in your ship, it really can be frustrating because sometimes you literally can't do anything. You can't shoot. You can't, like I had my guns get damaged in the middle of a fight and it was like I couldn't fight anymore and I had to try to repair my guns and then I just got shot down because I couldn't do anything. Sometimes you can't fly, you can't take off, you gotta go like get all the resources you need for that, which means you're wandering around on foot for a long time.
Well, I will say I haven't minded running around on foot. There's enough things to check out that it doesn't really feel like a huge slog.
Yeah, they've taken people's complaints, I guess, into account when they do updates, but sometimes I think they listen to the wrong people, because one of the things they've done is now you can basically materialize your ship wherever you are. Didn't used to be able to do that. You had to go back to your ship, which meant there was much more of a sense of survival, and it was a lot more tense when you were wandering out in the environment on a dangerous planet, because you had to really think about what you were going to do to make it back. And the same with the I assume you have the terrain manipulator tool.
Yeah.
That used to be a lot harder to get, and I definitely preferred that. It is way too easy now.
How much base building do you do? I haven't really done any of that because I like going to all the different places. And if I felt like I always had to come back to a base or construct it out of all this crap, it's like I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the only thing I really use it for is building the storage units and just storing materials and stuff in there. I assume you can probably use the teleporters now on the space stations, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that was something also that used to be a lot more difficult to access. I think now you can do it just right from the start.
Yeah.
Everything used to be harder, and I definitely prefer it the old way.
Do you put a base computer on every new planet you get to?
I don't do that unless there's a really cool planet that I want to kind of be able to come back to, but I don't think I've done it at all on any planets other than my one planet on the game that I'm playing right now.
So I think the first moment for me where I was like, oh shit, was you have your main game path to try and get to the center of the galaxy or whatever, but then you can go into free mode. And I went into free mode and it was, yeah, all these little dots of stars, you can go to any of them. And there were so many of them.
It doesn't take long, though, before you start to kind of say, oh, it's one of these planets, and like, oh, these are the same dumb-looking animals on this planet. Um, like, there is variety. I mean, one thing that is cool is there are certain types of animals that are much rarer, it seems. There are different planet presets, kind of. There's, like, the deserty planets and the ice planets and that kind of thing. And the planets that have a lot of plants on them, that kind of can have more, like, foresty areas and stuff like that, those used to be really rare. So whenever you found one, it was always kind of a point of excitement. It was like, I'm going to go check this planet out. But people, I guess, complained that they were so rare that nowadays you can find one in pretty much every system. So again, it takes away from the enjoyment of exploring and, you know, the sense of discovery and the sense of achievement when you've succeeded at doing something and you've discovered something. Now it's just kind of like, oh, it's all there, you know, whatever. Even on survival mode, it's all there.
Yeah, but see, I don't feel that way because I didn't know what it was like before.
Yeah. Sometimes I kind of am tempted to delete the updates and go back and play the game the way it was before, but then there were so many other things that were completely broken about it, so I don't know.
I am liking the language aspect of it, of trying to learn all the words and talk to all the aliens.
Okay, that's another thing that used to be a lot more difficult. You used to feel a sense of achievement.
Well, it is very time consuming.
That's true, but it used to feel more like whenever you learned a word, it was like, oh yes, I got another word. And, you know, you find a knowledge stone, it's like, yes, but now they're kind of all over the place. And, I mean, that's my biggest complaint about the whole thing, is just that too much of it is all the same. And they have improved that, too. It's that those kind of aspects are better than they used to be, but they could still stand to use a lot of improvement.
I am still enjoying it, though.
It's a fun game, you know, if you enjoy the exploration and the sense of, you know, being out in the universe and going to different planets and stuff like that.
I can definitely see myself playing this for a good chunk of time, then putting it down, and then trying to come back in 3 months and being like, oh shit, I don't remember how to do any of this, and just not doing it ever again.
Yes. I mean, I've restarted my game so many times just because I don't remember what the hell was going on. It's at the point where I have so many, like, sub-quests going on that some of them I'm like, I'm never even going to get back to that.
There's so much construction. I can't ever see myself taking that path in this game.
Yeah, some people really get into that. Like, my brother loves building bases in any kind of game like that, like a Fallout game or something. He'll like set up his whole house however he wants it or whatever. I always do the minimum. I do what I need and then I just move on.
I do not doubt you could create some really cool structures. And I kind of just want to go online and find what people have done.
Yeah, I would recommend checking some stuff out because people have made like KFCs, like Space KFC, and like all these like weird buildings and stuff. And yeah, if you're into that, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. It's just not my thing.
So that's another month.
A particularly scary month, October.
And we both talked quite a bit.
Yeah, maybe a little too much.
But we'll continue in November.
So join us then.
Were you scared?